It's like a mountain range you cannot cross. It's like a sheer rock face you cannot climb. It's like a sheet of ice you cannot scale. It's like an iron wall you cannot penetrate. The barrier has stood for 1,000 years. How can you pass through? My teisho today is on case 8 of the Heikigan Roku, or the Blue Cliff Record. And I'll begin by reading Master Ango's introduction to the case. If you understand, you can make use of it on the road, like a dragon reaching the water, like a tiger in the mountains. If you don't understand, then the worldly truth will prevail, and you will be like a ram with its horns caught in a fence. Sometimes a single phrase is like a lion crouching on the ground. Sometimes a phrase is like the Diamond King's jewel sword. Sometimes a phrase cuts off the tongues of everyone on earth, and sometimes a phrase follows the waves and pursues the currents. If you make use of it on the road, when you meet a man or woman of knowledge, you distinguish what's appropriate to the occasion. You know what's right and what's wrong, and together you witness each other's illumination. When the worldly truth prevails, one who has the single eye can cut off everything in the 10 directions and stand like a mile-high wall. Therefore, it is said, when the great function appears, it does not keep to any fixed rules. Sometimes we take a blade of grass and use it as the 16-foot golden body of Buddha. Sometimes we take the 16-foot golden body and use it as a blade of grass. But tell me, what principle does this depend upon? Do you really know? To test, I cite this case. Look. And the main case. At the end of the summer retreat, Suigan said to the community, "I've been preaching to you brothers all summer long. Look and see if my eyebrows are still there." Hofuku said, "The thief has a guilty conscience." Choke said, "Groan." Uman said, "Kan." That means barrier. And finally, Secho's verse on the case. Suigan teaches the followers, "For 1,000 ages there is no reply." The word barrier answers him back. He loses his money and suffers punishment. Decrepit old Hofuku, censure or praise is impossible to apply. Talkative Suigan is clearly a thief. The clear jewel has no flaws. Who can distinguish true from false? Choke knows him well. His eyebrows are grown. So the 4 men in this case, Suigan, Hofuku, Choke, and Uman, were all disciples of the great master Seppo. Shui Feng was his Chinese name. And in this case, Suigan takes the lead, and we have to consider his statement to his elder Dharma brothers kind of carefully. Unfortunately, we don't know very much about Suigan. We know he lived in the 9th century, but we don't have a date for his birth or his death. We do know he came from Zhejiang province in eastern China, and he eventually became one of Seppo's Dharma heirs, setting up his own temple in Mingzhou, where he apparently attracted a great many students and received praise from the emperor. Well, other than that, we only have some scattered records of things that he said to monks, and some of them actually several of them have kind of a remarkable bearing on the current case. For example, a monk once asked him, "There are words and phrases everywhere, and all of them are polluted. What is a higher truth?" Suigan said, "There are words and phrases everywhere, and all of them are polluted." The monk said, "What is a place where there are no words and phrases?" Suigan said, "The assembly is laughing at you." On another occasion, a monk once said to him, "Without words, I ask the master to speak." Suigan said, "Go in shame to the tea hall." So in this case, Suigan has been the head monk for the summer training session, what we call in the Zen tradition Ango. And Ango means peaceful dwelling. It's like a 90-day intensive practice period that takes place between May and August. And so as the head monk for the Ango, Suigan was responsible for preaching the Dharma, for teaching the assembly of monks living there. And that means he probably gave a great many talks. It could have been as many as one talk a day. And so he says, "I have been preaching to you brothers all summer long. Look and see if my eyebrows are still there." So we get that he's been teaching all summer long, but what is this business about his eyebrows? This seems like a pretty odd kind of question to be asking them about. It wouldn't make any sense to us here in the West in our current times until someone explains that at the time this incident took place, it was often said that if you talked too much about the Dharma, or if you misrepresented it, if you misspoke, that you would suffer a curse in which your eyebrows would fall off. So, in essence, Suigan is asking his elder Dharma brothers if he did a good job teaching the assembly. And basically, he's asking whether they approve of his teaching or not. And I can tell you from a personal perspective that this is something every Zen teacher has to deal with. When one realizes the truth, sometimes even just a little glimpse of it, then one knows it's impossible to talk about it with perfect accuracy. No matter what you say, it's never perfect. It's never quite right. And if it's not right, you might lead people astray. And they can be, if they're led astray, they can be confused for years. It happens. So we have this adage in Zen. We say, when one knows the Dharma, one fears the Dharma. And it's all because the intrinsic nature of language is dualistic, while the nature of the Buddha Dharma is intrinsically non-dualistic. So when we try to talk about it, it's like trying to bury a nail by holding it with a pair of pliers. It's just not the best tool. but it's the tool we have. It's a tool that we have to use. Sometimes I try to explain this with an analogy about a ship. And I say that Dharma words are like ships that go out on a vast ocean trying to navigate toward some beautiful, beautiful island. And they sail closer and closer to this island until the passengers on board see this kind of hazy dark patch on the horizon. And as the ship gets closer, they can start to make out some of the details of this beautiful island. They can see the sand on the beach and the palm trees and rocks and birds, maybe a waterfall, the distant hills. And the ship sails around the island so that you can take it all in from 360 degrees. And when you're that close to it and when you see so much of it, you want to be on that island yourself. But the problem is, ships can't go ashore. The best they can do is to go around and around the island. The best they can do is to get as close as they can get. And of course, my point is that we need language to get us on the right track, to get somewhere in the vicinity of the truth. But at the same time, we have to recognize that words and language have limits. We have to recognize that if we're not careful, we could easily sail in the wrong direction and never find what we're looking for. Sometimes I question why I publish these videos on YouTube. And honestly, it's because some of the things that I see on YouTube are just so dreadfully off. I read articles by supposed teachers online. And it's disturbing how one-sided they are. And so if you're new to Buddhism or to Zen, how will you know? You could be easily led astray and left adrift on a vast ocean. Now, this is a reason why one should choose a teacher with the greatest possible care. Anyway, you can probably appreciate that when you first become responsible for teaching others, you might have some feelings of insecurity, some uncertainty about whether you're doing okay or not. You might worry that your efforts are inadequate, or that you might be misleading people, sailing out into a vast ocean in the wrong direction. So, Suigan is in that situation. Now, he's awakened, but he's asking for feedback. And that's where this koan can really help us. Because when we really start to work on it, it's inevitable that we have to come face to face with our own insecurities, our own feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt, our hunger for approval, our fear of disapproval. Really, so often we feel like we have to hide those feelings from others. We don't want them to know just how shaky we're feeling. We may even deny our feelings of inadequacy, even to ourselves. Perhaps you know someone or voted for someone who can just never ever admit a mistake. Because their need to appear to be infallible is so great. A need that is in direct proportion to their cripplingly low opinion of themselves. Sometimes people do another thing too. They try to do an end run around their inadequacy, criticizing themselves first in order to head off having to listen to criticism from others. And it's like, now wait. Before you look at this spreadsheet, let me just say, I know I've made some mistakes. And sometimes when we're really hungry for approval, we'll try to milk it out of others by saying things like, I know you've been to France, so you're probably not going to like my souffle very much. And of course, the person has to respond, well, no, it's delicious. So in all these attempts to acquire approval or deny our feelings of inadequacy, we find that really just none of them are very satisfactory. None of them make our insecurities go away. They just keep tumbling around in our mind like clothes in an old clunky dryer. But I think if you sit with this koan, this case, it can become a very helpful tool for coming to grips with the feeling of insecurity. So Suigan asks his brothers, do you see my eyebrows or not? Did I do a good job or not? And Hofuku is the first one to pipe up, and he says, the thief has a guilty conscience. The thief has a guilty conscience. What does he mean? Well, if you've traveled the Zen road for any length of time, you probably know that when someone is called a thief, that's actually praise. It's not, a condemnation of criminality, let's say. So Zen teachers are thieves. And this is because they take things away from us that we're clinging to. They take away our precious notions. They rob us of our clinging, our self-clinging, our attachments, our cravings. So in this sense, when Hofuku refers to Suigan as a thief, that's praise. He's saying, you did well, you Zen thief, you. Good teacher. But Hofuku says also that this thief has a guilty conscience. Why would a thief feel guilty? Wouldn't like a master thief take some delight in his thievery? And if he doesn't, isn't he being kind of cowardly about it? In a way, it sounds like Hofuku is slightly criticizing Suigan. It's like he's saying, Suigan, you did a fine job with the teaching, but now you're going retrograde because of your insecurities. You're not able to let it go. You did what you did. You did the best you could do. It was fine. It was fine. but you got to let it go. Because if you don't let it go, then it's not fine anymore. Don't do that. But there's another way to look at what Hofuku says. Saying that Suigan has a guilty conscience could be like saying, yeah, of course you feel guilty, because one who knows the Dharma fears the Dharma. Of course you feel guilty. It is the very evidence of your skill as a teacher. So, what is Hofuku really saying? Is it praise? Is it criticism? Is it both? Is it neither? Something else. And then Choke has a one-word response. He just says groan. Grown. Groan. It's like saying, you don't need to worry about your eyebrows. They're still there. You did a fine job. In fact, not only are your eyebrows still there, they've actually grown. That's what a fine job you did. And it sounds a lot like approval. On the other hand, though, how big and bushy do you really want your eyebrows to be? Could it ever be too much? Sometimes it's said that Suigan's eyebrows are so thick and bushy, you'd have to cut them with a sickle. I'd say, at least a chainsaw. They're that big. They're overgrown. They're filling up the room. They're filling up the whole universe. That's how big they are. You can't go anywhere to get free of them. We're all tangled up in those eyebrows. So maybe Choki's saying something like, you were fine with your teaching, but now that you're asking how you did, you're adding something extra that doesn't need to be there. Sometimes we say people add a head atop their head. So again, we have to ask, is Choke's answer grown approval, or is it disapproval? Or is it both? Or neither? Or is it something else altogether? What is he really saying? And finally, we come to Uman, who just says, Kan. Kan. Which, as I said, means barrier. In ancient times, Kan was also used as a slang term, as a kind of warning, like you're warning someone that they're about to fall into a hole. It's meant something on the order of, watch out there! Look out! Is it possible that Uman is telling his three brothers that they had all better watch out, that they had better be careful, that they're all not seeing something? Uman was very famous for giving one-word answers to monks' questions. And this barrier response is one of the most famous of his famous responses. So maybe there's more to this barrier than just a simple warning. People say that when Uman uttered a word, he actually uttered 3 words. There were 3 ways of looking at a single word uttered by the great master Uman. What is this barrier? What does Uman really mean? In his commentary on this case, Master Engo says that Kan is very hard to penetrate. And we believe that it was for this reason that the Master Hakuin put this koan into the Nanto category, meaning it's one of a handful of koans that he considered to be very difficult to pass through. In one case, it took a master 6 years to crack this koan. According to Yamada Roshi, today many people get passed on this koan with only partial insight into it. They miss its greatest significance. And so it's worth coming back to even if you've been passed on it. And that's my experience. I'm quite sure that I did not really see the heart of this case when I was initially passed on it. I saw some of it, but when you come back to these great cases, they change. You see more. So if you want to crack this koan, you really have to penetrate Kan. You really have to penetrate barrier. What is this barrier? What is it that we're missing about reckoning with our, as I said, our hunger for approval, our fear of disapproval? Years ago, when I was first starting out in koan practice with Myoyu Roshi, my teacher, Myoyu Roshi, I wanted nothing more than to please her. I thought at some point in the vast koan curriculum where we have like 700 or 800 koans, at some point I would come up with a response to a case that would really knock her out. But really, the most I ever got was, okay, that's fine. Or just, that's fine. Go to the next one. I mean, really, there was only one occasion out of, like I said, 700 koans or so, where she said something mildly praise-like. She said, okay, I like that. That was it. And then as I spent more years with her, I was eventually asked to give a Dharma talk. It was my first Dharma talk, and to me that seemed like quite an honor. And of course I wanted to do a really good job. Didn't want to do anything to embarrass my teacher, say something stupid. So I worked really hard and I delivered the best talk I knew how to deliver, but afterwards she didn't say anything to me about it. The retreat just went on as it had been going. And so later, when I had the opportunity to go to Doksan, Doksan is the private interview with your teacher, we probably dealt with a case, talked about something, and then I asked, "What did you think of my talk? Was the talk okay?" Basically the same question that Suigan is asking. And she just said kind of flatly, "I knew you'd ask me that. It was fine." Just like that. There's a 1,000-foot cliff standing before me, sitting before me. An iron wall sitting before me. Now, you might think that a teacher who treats her students that way is being kind of aloof, kind of cool. And that they should do more to make students feel good about themselves. But nothing could be further from the truth. She could not have been kinder. She was displaying a grandmotherly kindness. Because you see, praise doesn't do what we think it's going to do. It doesn't do what we really want it to do, which is to assuage our feelings of uncertainty, insecurity, inadequacy. It might give us a momentary high, just like a drug might give you a momentary high, but then you're going to come down. And in some cases, praise can make your feelings of inadequacy worse. I remember when I was quite a young man, I wrote a lot of poetry. I was pretty good. And I liked it when I was invited to give public readings of my work. I enjoyed reading to people. But after the reading, if no one said anything to me about it, then I wondered, did they not like it? Was it okay? And sometimes, even though I was asking the questions in my head, I didn't always ask them out loud, but sometimes I did. Well, of course, what would they do? They would do exactly what people do when they're put on the spot. They would praise me. And then it all backfired because, I knew inwardly that even though it was probably motivated by some unconscious urge, I had milked that praise from them. I knew I had done that. And therefore, I now wondered whether their praise was sincere or whether they were just telling me what they thought I wanted to hear. So it didn't help. It just made things worse. So, how do we get past this barrier? What is this barrier really all about? How do you conceive of it? Is it like a mountain range that you cannot get over? Is it like a chasm in the earth that you cannot cross? Is it like a sheer cliff face that no one can scale? Is it like the proverbial iron wall? What is it? What is it? The Chinese character for barrier is similar to the one for gate. We Westerners typically think of a gate as being like, let's say, a garden gate. Something that pretty easily swings to and fro as you need it to. It's not too hard to get through it. But for the Chinese, gates and barriers were pretty much the same thing. Now, from the Chinese perspective, I guess I would say maybe, especially the ancient Chinese perspective, a gate was usually an enormous, impenetrable facade. A wall. It was mostly a wall meant to keep people out or in. Just as at Tiananmen in Beijing. A great gate that separated the imperial inhabitants of the Forbidden City from everyone else in the empire. It might have little doors in it, but mostly it was a wall. And it was only under special circumstances that those little doors, those little gates inside the big gate, could allow someone to go in or out. And if you were that special person, it was easy. You just stepped through. It was effortless. And suddenly you went from one world into another. Except it was the same one world. So in this sense, Uman's barrier is a lot like the title of that very famous collection of koans, The Gateless Gate. Or we could say the barrierless barrier. A barrier that's not even there. Or it's there in the imagination. You can think of it as a boundary. And I think one of the connotations of the word in Chinese is that it is a boundary between one's country and another country, or one's country and the wilderness, or one's country and some kind of frontier. But there's nothing there to prevent you from crossing. It's just a line on a paper map. Or I'm tempted to say it's a line on the map of one's deepest, most hidden insecurities. But what do I know? You can't just take my word for it. You're going to have to go to that barrier yourself. But if you do, if you're really there, then all you have to do is step over into that other country. A country that just so happens to be the same country as the country you came from. It's not that there isn't a country of right and a country of wrong. Those are real places. And yet, you can go right on beyond right and wrong, beyond approval and disapproval, all the way beyond. And beyond. Thank you for listening.